Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm gonna have an interesting video this time working on an oldie, on Jaguar 2001. I'm gonna give you all the vehicle information shortly. This is coming from Precision Autohaus in Tennessee. They said that they have, let me just read the note closer. It says instrument cluster, CAN codes, BCM, believe the processor in the instrument cluster is bad. I have the VIN number and it says also BCM CAN codes from cluster 3 bolts CAN. Very detailed information, right? So now sometimes shops or technician.
Could you try again?
Sorry guys. Maybe I was pressing my button on my iPhone. Yeah, sometimes shops or technicians don't understand that I need information in order to help you. And testing in the vehicle is so important. You know, if you don't reproduce a concern and narrow it down to something like, let's say, you know, the CAN bus is staying active even when the ignition is off, or the module is waking up after 20 minutes. You see what I mean? What am I trying to reproduce in here? So I did contact them because these modules have been here for a month. And, you know, with this much information and year model, is not much really I can do. So let me get you over to the views that I have first. So you can see I have the instrument cluster connected. There's a lot of glare. Probably it's better if I turn the light off. Well, not much. Let me see when I power it on how much you guys can see in there. But I think, let me power it up. Yeah, not much you can see there, right? Let me get this into a better angle. Maybe now if I turn that on, yeah, that thing that's a lot better, right? You can see a little bit of the, you know, the center display is on. So let me again show you the notes that I have created, you know, a whole lot of information so I can help you and help them in case you have a vehicle like this, you have problems too. But let's read the information on my request, because, you know, they sent this again in September 24. If I remember correctly, I was in vacation in Alaska and got here till like the end of September. So they have to bear with that. And I think I tell them. He said, good afternoon, just checking in to see if you will receive the module that we sent in. There were any updates on them if you have things. I was in October 10. I say, hi, Phillips. Yes, I have the modules and cluster here. I have not tested them yet. Can you explain more what the concerns are? Right, so trying to gather more information from them. It says all the lights on the instrument cluster light up with key inserted and not turned to the on position intermittently. The instrument cluster has an intermittent code U1261, which circuit failure, and that was in the SCP, which is probably a problem in the vehicle. And I'm going to show you that in a second. When this happens, the car will not start and will not communicate. And I'm going to show you also why. The codes, let's keep on changing every time we scan the car. We have instrument clusters, CAN communication codes in the rest of the modules. I believe the gateway is in the instrument cluster, and he is correct on the CAN bus. Tested the CAN signal out of the BCM and found only 3 volts. I'm not sure what CAN bus they test because the BCM has no CAN bus. So this is a misunderstanding or using the wrong terminology, because the BCM has no CAN bus. But again, as I normally do, I have created a lot of information for you guys and for them as well, because they will be seeing this as well. So let me show you. This is the communication multiplex diagram from Jaguar, specifically for the car. So what I have marked in here with those 3 boxes, the one in the center is the instrument cluster with the SCP bus. That's a completely different bus. It goes from 0 to 5 volts, but it's a communication bus. So if you read that with a multimeter, which I'm not really sure why you would do that, but you can. I mean, it's not going to affect anything. All you're going to see is a change in voltage. It all depends on what meter you're using and how fast the refresh rate on that meter. You might be able to see some activity, but that's it. But you not even know when it's happening, how often it's happening or not. So the only way to really test a communication bus, is using an oscilloscope, which I have also here connected, and I'm going to show you that as we go along with the testing, because this is going to be a test video where I'm going to show you wiring diagrams, the correct way to connect this on the bench, and also to perform your test. Because not only this works for the bench, you can do this same test as far as powers and grounds and communication lines on the vehicle. Do you have those? If you have those, then you should get the same results I am getting here, right? So you see what I mean? So it's very important that you follow along this test, and this applies to a lot of these vehicles, especially in these Jaguars. They use this communication up to like 2008, pretty much the same, and it's pretty much, pretty strong, right? So, but let's keep going on here. So on the right side, the one with the box in there, that's the DLC connector, the connector where we plug our scanners. That's called DLC connector or OVD port. The other box that I have on the left side is also on the SCP bus, but that is a central, how can I call that? Like a central connector where we have the rest of the modules connected to it. So we have the instrument cluster on the center, that connector, that bus connector on the middle, which is a CA222. And then around that, we have the body processor module, the security and lock control module, the driver door module, passenger door module, driver seat, driver rear door, passenger seat control module, and passenger rear door control module. So those are the modules that are connected into that bus. In the upper section, I'm going to move those red boxes. Now this is the CAN bus. So, well, before we go there, we can see how the instrument cluster communicates to that network, and that network talks to the scanner on those two wires that I have right here on the right side, and pins 10 and pin 2 on the data link connector. So even though the cluster is there, it's not a gateway. It's not acting as a gateway. It's acting as another module onto this bus. So it has absolutely, it can be there or it cannot be there. The reason it's there is obvious reasons, like, our door is open, so it's going to create a ding, a dong, whatever you call that. Or it's going to flash a light in the instrument cluster when a door is open, right? Because and it's also for the security module. Okay, is the key okay? And then otherwise it's going to be an anti-theft, a light on the cluster. So that's why it's there. Also, it's going to be a start enable process that needs to have, when the body control module and that security module are in connection, there will be, okay, we are good to start. And there is a little more on that, and I'm going to show you in another diagram that I have here when we go along on how the vehicle starts. But realistically, for what we're testing, is not that important. But I can tell you that there is also another communication. Well, it's not really a communication. It's another wire that goes in between the body control module and the security module connected to the engine control module. That's the start enable code, anti-theft, right? So that is for the immobilizer. But again, this is not part of what we're doing, and that's what I don't have the diagram to keep it as simple as possible. All right, but let's go over to the CAN bus. On the CAN bus, yes, the instrument cluster is the gateway. And why is the gateway? We're going to have a very big difference. So we got these modules here, which is the ABS module, the transmission module, depends on what version of those. That's what you see we have. Let me make this a little smaller if I can. No, I cannot. I'm not sure why I'm not being able to reduce it, but let's leave with that one, right? So we got 2 ABS and 2 transmission. Well, it's because it all depends on which version the vehicle is, right? And then goes over to the to the engine control module. Then we have the gear selector module, and that will be connected as is in here. So the ABS can be connected directly to the transmission module, or it can have a splice like in the bottom in here, and then it will go to another splice before it enters the engine control module, and it will go through the engine control module on the other side of that connector. That's how it's shown in there. And then it will enter the gear selector module, go out in another pin, on another pins, and then it will enter the instrument cluster. So from these 4 modules, right, 1, 2, 3, 4, right, we have no direct access to communication unless we go through the instrument cluster, because they're not connected to the to the OBD port like all these bottom ones are, right? So we see the instrument cluster. We have this communication here going into the instrument cluster, but we also have a wire directly connected to the OBD port. That's not the case on the CAN bus. The CAN bus is not directly connected, and the reason, manufacturers do that is in case you connect a tool that has a problem, like it's shorted or it's damaged. They don't want you to connect it directly to the engine or the transmission, and then the car dies while driving, right? So that's to prevent an accident. That's what they do that. Also for security reasons, but mostly it's for safety. And so by doing this way, in case you connect something that's bad, the only part of that bus that is going to be down is going to be the communication in between the instrument cluster and the OBD port. But the rest will be isolated. You see, that's why they do it. But yeah, so we have CAN bus, CAN network on the top, and then we have the SCP network on the bottom. Those are completely 2 different networks and completely 2 different speeds and amplitude. Amplitude means the, let's say, 5 volts or 3 volts. So the amplitude of one can be 3 volts. The amplitude of the other one can be up to 5 volts. So that's the amplitude. All right, so that's just to give you a little bit of that. Let me put the connectors that I have made. Let me get the one for the BCM as well. So I'm going to put this one here and this one on this side, so you guys get to see now a better way of what I have connected here. All right, so the BCM it has 3 big bolts or 3 big lugs on the bottom. There is also attached to chassis. That's also a main ground. And it's very important that the body, the chassis body ground is good, because otherwise this module will have a lot of problems. The ground on the battery needs to be nice and clean, because otherwise you will have a main problem with the battery control module, because that is the main ground for this module. As I mark on the bottom, we have 2 powers, one in pin 80 and another one in pin 104, and then 3 small grounds that will be supplied from the ignition switch. Very unique on Land Rovers and Jaguars. They supply ground through the ignition switch and also power, but so it's different. It has a power bus or ignition feed and a ground feed through the ignition switch. So very important to make a difference on that, because you can cook something if you don't know where you're working with. But so those grounds coming from the ignition switch are 15 and 41, and I mark pin 67 also with a ground, because at the end that's exactly what it does, but that's the key in switch. So that's how the body control module knows if the key is in the ignition or not. On the right side, I have the instrument cluster. I'm going to close the body control module because it's pretty simple. The instrument cluster, it has an error on the diagram, and I have seen this many times on these Jaguars. So the connector on the left side is called by Jaguar FC24, and the one on the right side FC25. All my connections for the test that I'm doing are on the FC24, the one on the left side. And as you see, I put a mark in there, check these pins are backwards. So I put the connections correctly as far as the numbers, because otherwise I will have to flip the numbers and do a lot more work. But I then put the red numbers outside myself to remember that in the reality, in the cluster, those pins are in the opposite location. But pin 15 is an ignition, pin 1 is an ignition, pin 15 is a constant battery power, pin 16 and 4 are ground, and pin 10 and pin 23 are the CAN bus low and high, or high and low, whatever, right? But the pin outs are incorrect. The other pin, the other connector on the other hand, the pins are correct, and that's what I put. The pins are correct, and there the location of 1 is on the upper right corner, and the 14 on the upper sorry, on the lower right corner. The auto connector is wrong. It should be opposite. I don't know why they did that, but it is wrong. And I always like to mark those for when especially when I'm sharing information. I also put in there a note for myself. It has good communication and does not need a terminator resistor. No gauge test with the scanner. So there is no sweep test or any bidirectional controls with the Snap-on or any other scanner. I tried all the scanners I have. None of them could do anything with this. All right, guys. So that is the connection. So let's go now to the test. Like that is, as you can see, the gauge is on. The instrument cluster is on. Let me put the SUS in the screen, and I'm going to put the picoscope as well. Let me just get that one in here, because I had it ready, but not on your view. Let me make sure that it's full open before I adjust it. And I'm just going to put that one here. Move the scanner. The scanner, I don't need it that big, so I'm going to make it a little smaller. And I'm going to move the Pico. Again, the Pico is the oscilloscope. Like that size. We don't really need to see that much either on the instrument cluster. All we really look for is to be on. I put some notes on the bottom. Not sure how much you can read, but I'm going to read it to you. So the notes that I have in there, it says blue channel is the SCP negative, which is connected to FC24 pin 14 on the instrument cluster, and the red channel is the SCP positive connected on the FC24 connector, pin 13 on the instrument cluster. The BCM and the scanner are connected to the SCP and reading data. That's how I captured that. What you see right there is a capture of a good communication. I'm going to just, go a little closer so we can see what is exactly on all those little lines that we see, or bars. Now you can see, if I zoom, a lot more detail. That's a good communication. Amplitude, I also have measurements. So right here, we can see the minimum and the maximum on the blue channel, which is half a volt and then 5.1. And it's going to be the same on the red channel, but it's going to start from low to high. And the blue channel is going from high to low. And that's a perfect image. If I move this channel up, we can see that those two are a complete image of each other on the opposite direction. And that's the way manufacturers do for communication. That is a redundant circuit. So if in case one gets down by a short or something, the other one will still be able to perform the communication task, so those modules can stay online and working. All right, so let's now turn this on. Let me take now it's running, and take all those measurements, or not measurements, noise out of there, and you'll see wow, that is not looking the way it was. Well, remember what I put on the notes, with the scanner and the BCM connected. So right now in the scanner, I'm outside, I'm not reading any data. I'm going to go back so we can first enter the instrument cluster, because I want to show you that we are indeed able to read fault codes. And I'm going to show you that the only fault code that I get in here is B1202, fuel sensor open circuit, high resistance. If I disconnect any of the, I'm going to do that. Let me just unplug. Which one is the easiest way for me? Let me just do this. This is the high side. I disconnected the high side on the instrument cluster for that bus. Let's exit and let's re-enter the instrument panel, and let's read fault codes. You see right now we still got communication because we're still connected to the negative side of the SCP bus. but we have a U1260 SCP plus circuit failure. Is there something wrong with the instrument cluster? No, right? We know it's not. And so if we go back to, or I go back to the notes of this shop, they said they got a U1261 circuit failure. So that U1261, it could be a communication bus problem either on the CAN bus or in the SCP bus. All right, so let's keep going with the tests that we have here. I'm going to plug now that back into where I was. I'm going to go out and then re-enter the instrument cluster. Read the fault codes. So I have to erase the fault code. Let me just do an erase, clear fault codes. I might have to cycle the ignition. Let me see. No, that was good enough to erase it. All right, so now let's do the same thing, but with the order, which is the negative side. Let me just make sure. Yeah, it will be this one. So I just disconnected now the negative side of the bus. Let's see if it just reading the fault code reads it. Yes, it does. And you see that is actually, okay, I was able to reproduce their fault code. Now the fault code we have here, let me make sure that you guys can see that there. I'm going to make that one bigger on the screen right now so you guys can get to see, look, U1261, that is exactly their code. Is it a problem on the instrument cluster? No. What is the problem? Either on one of the other modules that is connected to the SCP bus or in the harness. But this is where lack of testing, or at least giving me more information. Yes, we check the connector, the splice connector on this bus, and everything is good. We check from here to here, from here to here, but I don't have anything. All I have is a code. This is like very small information. Sometimes shop don't understand that. It's not a problem. I can do the tests, but I can just do so much, and it's going to be 2 module tests. This is not just testing one module. I'm testing 2 modules, so it's $200 test per module. In this case, I'm going to get that. Okay, so let's reconnect that wire. Let me, yeah, you can see me from underneath in there. And let's erase the fault codes. Let's read the codes again. The U1261 is no longer present, right? So where is the problem? Not here, right? At least not with that. All right, I was just wanted to show you that in detail. And you can see how the communication is really slow on the SCP bus because the instrument cluster is talking on CAN bus, not on SCP bus. And that's why we only see that little line in there. But if it sees it is missing one of those signals, immediately flags a code. All right, now let's to enter and see the very different network activity. We need to enter the body control module. We're going to do that now. And as soon as we enter, you're going to see a little more data in there, but then it stops, right? Because all we need now, all we just did, it was to ID the module, the BCM, and that's it. Because we're not requesting any information. Since this is not connected to the vehicle, there is no other module talking. The scanner is like, are you there? Yes, I'm here. But I didn't request data or fault codes or nothing, right? So I'm going to enter data. And now when I enter data, you're going to start seeing a lot more activity on that network. And now we can see that into the red and the blue. And now with all these PIDs in there, that is going to stay active. Why? Because now I'm transferring back and forth information from the scanner to the BCM, and from the BCM to the scanner. The instrument cluster is only receiving any data that the BCM wants to share, like a door open or something of the immobilizer. But if it's nothing in between, the BCM, the instrument cluster will just stay low profile. Let's call that. All right, so one other thing that I want to show you is I'm going to go over to the ignition kit, the key in. I'm going to put that in there so you can see it up in the top now in a graph where it says key in the ignition switch disable. I'm going to unplug that one so you can see that indeed, now if I move it, you see it went to enable. I'm going to leave it in there so you can see the graph now with a blue background. And that is why, because I unplugged this wire right here. That's pin 67 on the BCM. When I plug it back in, that will go now to disable. Why? Because the key is in the ignition switch. So, and the reason I put that in there is because of his other concerns about the cluster coming on by itself with just the key on. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to turn the ignition off by leaving the battery connected. So we're going to most likely lose communication. You see now we lost communication with the BCM. Why? Because I turned the ignition off. We can see the SCP bus is still sending some messages in there, some messages in there. The modules are not completely asleep yet, but, and then now it's nothing in there. Now it went to sleep. It very quickly goes to sleep. Is it the instrument cluster coming on? No, it's not coming on. So we're definitely missing pieces of the puzzle in here. Why? Because again, with all the respect that all the technicians around need or deserve, because sometimes it's very hard to gather information from 2001. And believe me, I have done my homework. I can show you this, and I'm going to keep that away from you 1 second. But these are wire diagrams that I gathered to be able to test this, and it was not in one time that I was able to get, to get all this. I got ABS, all control module connectors, and this is all, as you can see, Jaguar original information. So this is where I got all this information. I have also dissect completely this instrument cluster. You can see I got all pictures of the instrument cluster. Let me take this out of here for a second so you guys can watch more. And I have, put all the values, and I have a full video that I did for this instrument cluster, not specifically on this vehicle, but from another customer, where I show activities and tests that I did on the needles and everything. So I take my time to do this. This is not I also collected this for this specific vehicle. I work on tests on the SCP, tests on the positive, on the negative, on the positive and the negative with the scanner connected. And I save all that information because I can use this for future reference for other vehicles if I need to test or do anything later. Is it this coming on? And this is very important to do, this vibrations that could be something loose in the instrument cluster. They might be the one, because it doesn't even say, with this very small information that I got from this customer. And I forgot to say, this is a Jaguar Vanden Plas. That's the designation is a 2001. But yeah, all I have is all the lights on the instrument cluster light up with the key inserted and not turned to the on position. So you might have a problem with the ignition switch. With this very minimum information, if this technician would have told me, we check the instrument cluster is coming on when the key is in, but we check for pin 67, pin 24, pin whatever on the instrument cluster, which are the grounds coming from the ignition and the powers coming from the ignition switch to the BCM, to the instrument cluster, and they were not in there. The only thing that was there was the battery positive and the grounds. That's it. But we put an oscilloscope, and those powers or those grounds were never there in the instrument cluster. Even like that, it came on. Okay, well, then now I have more to work with. But is it because when the key gets in, it's shorting and it's out, or you have a bad switch and now it's sending an ignition or a ground when it's not supposed, and it's waking up the instrument cluster, or it's powering up? Because in order for those lights to come on, you need to have an ignition voltage. In this case, hopefully you saw what I put in there. We have grounds, we have a constant battery power, but we do have an ignition feed. That's the only one that can wake up this instrument cluster with all the lights on as they refers. And the only one that can give that is the ignition switch, which in this case, I will be the ignition switch. I turn this on, and now the instrument cluster comes on. Why? Because I turn them on. And that should not happen with just you put the ignition key in. It should only be when you turn the ignition on. But if they're getting that, you might have a bad ignition switch again. Something is broken inside. But with just this minimum information, all I'm doing is a guess. And I don't like to do too much guess, but I'm just trying to throw ideas of what could be, because testing powers and grounds and communication and everything, as you have seen me doing today, they're all good. So now you can have the amplitude of the waveform on the SCP bus. I have saved those, and now I have without modules connected over to the instrument cluster, with a module connected, and with the scanner and a module talking. So we can see all that, and I have the activity saved for my future records as well. In the CAN bus, I don't really need to do it. CAN bus is a CAN bus, and goes from 1.5 to 2.5, and from 2.5 to 1.5, right? So let me just make sure I'm saying that. So it's from 2.5 to 1.5, and from 2.5 to 3.5, right? So I'm sorry. Sometimes I speak too fast. But that is just a CAN network. So that should be very easy, very simple for anybody to really test, or to find waveforms to look how a CAN bus should look and what the speed is. Usually a CAN bus has a 500 kilohertz speed. I can measure this one, but if you really want to know more about the SCP, just go online and look for SCP. That stands for, and I can tell you the correct information in here, which I have. Let me just give you that. Communication protocol descriptions right here. Let me just move you over there. So this is very important. It says the SCP communication network remains, let me just see, okay, right here, the standard corporate protocol. That's what SCP stands for, a standard corporate protocol. And then the CAN is control area network. That's what those letters mean. All right, guys, so again, this is a testing, and I hope that you can get and grab a lot of information on what I'm trying to share with you as far as communications and what the module needs, because it's very hard to find information. And believe me, I did a very extensive homework of hours and hours trying to see what this BCM needed to be communicated to. It's a lot simpler if you do it in the car, because you can check at least continuity and see what is turn the ignition on. Do I have power? When is everything working, you can see, okay, I have power here, power here, power here, ground here. And I found, all the pinouts, but it doesn't really say ignition feed or ground or nothing like that. It just says B plus, B plus, B plus, B plus. So it's very inconclusive information. These engineers, when they were doing this in 2000, they were not too cheerful. They really want to be there for every technician to call them, and the CAN bus and all this communication were like a taboo, like it was only for engineers because it's so complex and so difficult. It's not, it's super simple. But yeah, engineers over design things and make it very hard for others to understand on purpose. All right, guys, I don't want to take much more of your time. Thank you so much for visiting Mike Salazar Diagnostics. If you're here, please don't forget to subscribe. I see you next time. Bye-bye.